The hillsides, the geology and the geography, as much as the natural features are important, they're nothing without intervention of people and human beings making decisions about how to use them. The most important, in the 20th century, two big ones. Most important is the 1907 Parks and Parkway Plan of George Kessler. Absolutely brilliant plan. First citywide plan that was ever done. Yes, it's focused on parks and parkways, but it carried this. There was not another park plan until 1992. 1907 to 1992. In effect, it drove the park system development for 60 years. I mean, there should have been another one a lot earlier, but it didn't happen. But this is what defines, this is where Columbia Parkway comes from. This is where Central Parkway comes from. This is where Victory Parkway comes from. This is where Mount Airy Forest comes from. This is where putting Eden Park, which had been developed partially in the 19th century, into a much larger context. Without Kessler's vision, we would not have the city we've got. And if you look out here, or if we were across in Kentucky and looking back this way, this is one of the greenest urban areas any place. Partly that's because of these hillsides, which we've stopped building on, and we stopped cutting down all the trees and reforested. And because these neighborhoods get separated by green space that's broken and shouldn't and can't be developed in one way or another. So you've got these neighborhoods and suburbs that get developed, each one with its own distinct identity. Each one, there's bad sides of this because it means that we fragmented ourselves and we segregated ourselves, not just on racial lines, but on economic lines and religious lines and all other things. But but what Kessler comes along and says, we got to think about this as a whole. We don't want to plan parks for a city. We want to plan a park with a city inside. That was his basic vision, that the city is inside a giant green space. And when he came to Cincinnati in 1906 and saw the city for the first time, one of the first things he remarked about was, how could this city have not taken advantage of its hilltops and hillsides? How could it have ignored that? So you look at his plan in 1907, and by the way, in 1907, he's still drawing in little horse-drawn wagons. It's not all automobiles yet. That's still, it's sort of coming another 20, 30 years. So he already sees this. Everything that he does is worked into that. And then, after World War I, there's another planning process. It's the first conscious city plan. It gets published in 1925, but the process created something else. In 1924, it created zoning. So the first zoning laws are adopted in Cincinnati in 1924 as part of a process to create the 1925 plan. And one of the interesting things about that plan, again, it makes so much difference to actually read things rather than just read what some crazy historian has written about it, because crazy historians leave out all the interesting stuff. They just get to the big. If you look at the 1925 plan, what you find is that they said on the top, the hilltops, the tops of that plain that are out there that look like hills, but they're, thank you, Eric. But if you look at that, there should be a cultural institution on the top of every one of those. Now, obviously, in Mount Adams, it was going to be the art museum, but also tied with it a new industrial arts museum focused on artisanship, focused on Cincinnati's tradition of having skilled craftspeople working in industry, working in the crafts, and there should be this craft center. On the top of Mount Auburn, it was going to be a civic music center, which was what they were proposing. And on the top of Fairview Heights, a community center with a concert hall, a dance hall, a restaurant, and, quote, a certain number of Coney Island features. All done in an attractive design. So here was the 1925 plan. The plan itself was saying, how do we use these vistas? And how do we incorporate the hillsides and take them into account? And then all of that, of course, then comes to the 1948 Metropolitan Master Plan, which is, if you haven't read it, it's only 18 volumes, but it's very big print and lots of pictures. It is the beginning point of the modern city. And it too is trying to deal in some way with hillsides. But it gets overwhelmed by the demand for interstates and for making the city safe for automobiles. And that's where we start to get into some real trouble with hillsides and cutting them away and moving things away. And that's where Hillside Trust sort of, I think, has its origins of trying to stop some of that modern development. So what I've tried to do is not talk about the history of the Hillside Trust, because you guys know that, but the context out of which it came, the natural context of the community that we lived in, the geography, the geology, how that influenced our development, and how in the 20th century these two great efforts of the 1907 Kessler Plan, this incredible vision, and the 1925 city plan both saw the hillsides and the hilltops vistas as absolutely essential. So I think